I'd like to tell some stories since I guess while I'm on myself and our side of the family, when we were kids, of course, the Glockners, when grandfather died in 1925, they had a lot of debt, and of course the Depression hit them, and which I think the same thing happened to the Glockners on the West Coast. But there is a honesty, moral ethic that I feel has been transmitted through the Glockner family, and not just the Glockner family, but I just think specifically there's something that continues to flow through that honesty is the best policy, and if you owe somebody, and I don't know if any of them have ever taken a bankruptcy to avoid paying a creditor, but the whole concept of my grandfather, and I know his brothers, that if it took you 3 generations to pay off your creditors, that's what you did. And with the Depression hitting and the large debt and the drop-off and the bank holiday trapping all their working capital that they did have in the banks, they were forced by their creditors to liquidate their inventories, and that's what they did with the hardware store, and they lost the real estate. The dealership real estate was taken back for a $30,000 note by Penn Mutual Life Insurance. I can remember when they were auctioning off the inventory at the hardware store, and it was bringing about 10 cents on the dollar, of my dad and his sister, Aunt Helen, standing out on the sidewalk just crying because, and they were young. I mean, you got to remember that my dad was in his early 30s, and Aunt Helen, and so it was a tough time, and I know, in looking at the financial statements that I have that have been accumulated back into the 1900s, but I don't know how they made it through the Depression years, and then here by 1940 they were getting their act together, and things were going well for them, and here comes the war. Of course, you got to remember, and I think it's interesting, that your great-grandfather, they left Germany. The story that's been heard, they left Germany to get away from Kaiser Wilhelm, to get away from wars. Here they come over here in 1847. What happens to them? Here comes the Civil War. And I don't know what went on. I know, the Ohio River is a Mason-Dixon line, and Portsmouth's on the north side of the Mason-Dixon line. But the people on the south side of the Mason-Dixon line, on the Kentucky side, in eastern Kentucky, were anti-slavery. So most of them fought with the Union. I guess grandfather and great-grandfather and his brother have not heard anything about what they did or what went on during the Civil War. The only thing I know is on my grandmother's side, her father, Joe Lang, was the bookkeeper in the Gaylord Mill, which was a pig iron and iron mill on the riverbank at Portsmouth, when Morgan's Raiders came and got in behind the Union lines and north of the Mason-Dixon line, and were pillaging and burning towns and any manufacturing process they could, and they got within 12 miles of Portsmouth and for some reason diverted away. But great-grandfather Lang tore up the floor in his office and dug a hole and buried all of what currency they had and the books underground, and in case they burnt that mill down. Well, Morgan's Raiders didn't have to burn it down. It burned down of its own accord a couple years later. But that's the only thing that I've heard in the family about the Civil War. But here we come up into Portsmouth was inundated. It's been a flood town ever since, and most of the river towns have been on the Ohio and the Mississippi, are subject to floods, and they had no history of a 50-year flood factor or 100-year flood factor like they have today. But 1913, the normal pool stage of the river before they built dams was 9 feet, and the water flood level in 1913 was 63 feet. So you know, that's 54 feet above normal pool stage of the river. Of course, that came up and got in all the homes. The family have lost so much because of the floods inundating those homes, never thinking the water would ever get up as high as it was the last time. Lost their pictures, their books, so much of the memorabilia that most people would have who lived in the same town for the number of years that, you know, the Glockners have had roots in Portsmouth. I mean, you know, we're into 140 years here now, and 141 years, and there aren't many families today that stay around in one and perpetuate themselves as long as this family